Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my response video to the article we read about understanding unconscious biases. So, for the first few questions, for the pros and cons of stereotypes, I'm going to start with the pros. So, some pros to stereotyping is that it helps us sort the stimuli that we see and experience around us into categories so that we can process our environments in an effective manner. And it thus provides us with a sense of order and predictability that we can rely on using during our interactions with other people. So the examples that we were given in the article were, for one, speaking loudly in front of elders and going to the doctors for advice when we're not feeling well. On the other hand, a few cons to stereotypes are, firstly, most of our stereotypes are invalid social constructs that we as people have built based on other outliers in our community. These will particularly be on race, gender, and religion. Stereotypes are arbitrary, as we humans aren't homogeneous and can't all be represented under a singular category, as there will always be differences even in those categories that we've created. Another big con is that biases between different social groups can cause us to exaggerate our stereotypes when we see those differences. And lastly, stereotypes drive social judgment and discrimination. The second question was very interesting. It was essentially to explain bias and unconscious bias to a 6-year-old. So, with children that young, I think that the best way to explain bias to them would be to make it simple using visuals and examples. And the example that I gave was to choose 2 stuffed animals, one that you know that the child likes and another that they may not be so fond of. And after you have the child choose which stuffed animal they'd rather play with, you would ask them, why did they choose said stuffed animal? And most children would probably say something along the lines of, I don't know, or simply just, it was my favorite. And that in itself is a bias, rather conscious or unconscious. It could just be that the stuffed animal had sentimental meaning to them, and it was given to them by someone that they loved. It was their favorite color, or that they just like it better because they've played with it more. There were 4 types of stereotype resistance that they listed in the article. The first one was attribution bias, which is a bias that's made on a person's behavior. The second was attention bias, meaning that we as people pay more attention to things that are consistent with our stereotypes than those that lean away from or contradict them. The third was subtyping, which simply means subcategorizing a member of a stereotype that may act differently from others that are put in the same category. And lastly, the self-fulfilling prophecy, in which a member that is put into a stereotype may make accidental or unconscious actions that thus reaffirm those stereotypes. Like an example would be someone acting aggressive because the stereotype against their group is that all of the people in this group should be acting aggressive and that they're angry people. In terms of personal experience, I have personally been victimized by attribution biases. In high school, I didn't have very many friends, and I was considered a bully, and I was thrown into the clique of bitchy people. And this wasn't necessarily because I was that kind of person, but it was just because of the fact that I was very introverted and I didn't really go out of my way to talk to anybody that I didn't already know. So that kind of sums everything up. And in terms of the so what and now what, I just wanted to say that when thinking about biases, it's very important for us to realize that biases are present everywhere. We even have our own biases against certain groups of people, but I believe that a very important step for us to take is to make our own efforts to stop feeding into those biases. And that can be done pretty easily if we think about what we're going to say before we say it, and if we think about our actions before carrying them out and potentially hurting anybody. Discrimination and bias are unfortunately things that have been around for many, many years, but it can be stopped in our generation if we take the right action.